Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. So, hello and welcome to Baz Recommends number one. Just to begin with, this is not my usual episode. So, you're not getting a story in this episode. Instead, this is a very short episode about other podcasts. Why, you may ask? Well, it's a good question. So, first of all, just to say, I'm working away on something for some future episodes right now, so there won't be a story this week, okay? But there is something coming from me that I just need time to work on this week. So I thought instead what I'd do is do this recommends episode. So basically where this comes from is you'll have heard me through lots of different episodes play out promos for other podcasts. And in fact, actually, lots of you have come to me through my promo for Extraordinary Stories being played elsewhere. So, I just think it's great. I think it's brilliant to just be able to swap different promos with different podcasts. So a while ago, I reached out to a few different podcasters and I asked if they would like to do a swap. You swap your promo with me, I'll play yours, etc., etc. Sort of, I don't know, market trading, if you will. Hang on. Is that what market trading is? I don't actually know. I said that so confidently. Sort of like market trading. Oh, hang on. I don't know what market trading means. Okay, so maybe it's not like that. Anyway, the result is I've got promos for people and there's other podcasts that I just want to share and say these are great to listen to. And what I've done with each of them, because I think this is something for me as a podcast fan and listener, something I think is really important, is when someone recommends a podcast to you, it's sometimes really nice to be able to just go to an episode that gives a really good example of what that podcast does really well. Of course, that's always just my opinion in these cases. I haven't asked the hosts of these podcasts if they agree or disagree, but do you know, it's that thing of like, do you know when sometimes someone goes, oh hey, this is a brilliant podcast, you should really listen to this, and so you look it up and you realise there's like 376 episodes and you're like, where the fuck do I start with this? Do I go to the middle? Do I go to the latest episode? Should I go back to episode 1? You know that way that sometimes you're just a bit like, I don't know where to begin. The thing I always get is, do you know when someone recommends a podcast and you listen to one of the later episodes and then you're like, hang on, have I missed lots of the journey here? Is there gaps that I've not got here? So I thought what I'd do is I would just tell you, in my humble opinion, some really great podcasts. A lot of them you might know, some of them you might never have heard of. And then I thought I'd just tell you a wee episode that might just key you in to listening. I don't have promos for every show, only a few, because, well, some of them are quite big, quite fancy pants, big guns podcasts, and they wouldn't swap a promo with little old me. So those ones I'll just discuss. All right, let's get started. Let's spin the wheel of podcasts. No, let's not. That was such a shit expression. Let's not spin the wheel of podcasts. Barry, you fucking idiot. Okay, let's start with Happy Face. Alright, what is it? Well, it's the story of the Happy Face serial killer, who was a truck driver who travelled around killing, murdering and mutilating women in horrible, horrible ways. So, what I love about Happy Face is that it's not just your regular, a host telling you the journey of a serial killer's escalation or talking you through their childhood or all the things that you normally hear. Instead, the voices in the podcast are the daughter and the wife of the man in question. And it's just brilliant because what you really get is that you get this real human emotion. You also get his voice at points because there's like sort of bits of his interviews come into it at points, and some of the letters that he read are played out on the podcast. But what makes it so brilliant is, as I said, you're getting him, and you're getting this massively wide picture of like a moment from his marriage, a moment when his daughter was 12, up to sometimes you hear from like one of the victims' sons or daughters and how it's impacted on their life. So you're getting all these sort of different input on this monster of a man. They are short, snappy, half-hour episodes. I mean, some are a gut punch, some are a kick in the balls. There's times when they describe really real moments of things that he did to them as a father, as a husband, and in a way, it's kind of the beauty of the podcast as well, because those details, just those wonderful wee side stories, just build an amazing picture. So Happy Face, I would put up there as one of my 2018 highlights. Now, what you'd want to do with Happy Face is start at episode 1. Alright, next. I would be shocked if you didn't know it. And most of you will, but it is Bloody Murder. It's it's an Australian comedy murder podcast hosted by Tara and Barney. They are the creators, hosts of the podcast. It's just hilarious. The stories are brilliant. They're two kind of brilliant storytellers in their own way. There's so much banter between them. They just bounce off each other. Once you get into it, there's lots of kind of constant running jokes through the podcast, and you really feel like you're laughing along with them. It's a lovely feeling listening to that podcast. I would go for, now, I mean, you could dive in anywhere, but there's an episode that I've returned to quite a few times, episode 59. It's the Gucci murders and the Kane brothers. There are like bad accents, there's just ridiculous chat going on as they tell these stories, and it's so worth a listen. So, Bloody Murder.
Hi, I'm Barney Black.
And I'm Tara Saravan.
And we do Bloody Murder.
We're a weekly true crime podcast that focuses on some of the lesser-known crime stories from Australia.
And indeed around the globe.
We're a comedy podcast with a dark sense of humour.
But we're dead serious about murder and the people it affects.
We find humour in some unexpected places.
But never at the expense of the victims or their families.
We've been described as the blue cheese of podcasting.
Addictive, strong and satisfying.
And a bit stinky.
I am not.
You know you are.
Bloody Murder is available on your favourite podcatcher.
Okay, the next one is a rogue. A little rogue one. It's not true crime. It's, well... What is it? What actually is it? I don't know the genre. Maybe society and culture would be the genre. It's the Getting Curious podcast by Jonathan Van Ness. Now, if you've seen even a 1 minute of Queer Eye, the Netflix programme, you'll be familiar with the fabulously dressed, long-haired, moustache-wearing, camp as Christmas Jonathan Van Ness, who's just this big, huge personality and all this like finger snapping, honey, and all this, and you know, and he's gorgeous, and it's this really thing over the top, which is great entertainment on TV. So when he brought a podcast out, I remember thinking, wonder how the hell that's going to translate into a podcast. And here is the thing. What's really interesting is the podcast shows you, if you were in any doubt, what an actually fiercely intelligent man Jonathan Van Ness is. He manages in that podcast to be both that slightly flamboyant side of himself, but also really well informed, fiercely political. And the whole thing just kind of comes together as like a really lovely listening experience. So how it kind of works is he just sits down with a guest each week and he gets curious about something. He just opens up a huge subject, and they are huge. So I mean, his episodes range from racism to Brexit to adoption to bees to Renaissance art. He basically just sits down with a mic and he says to his guest, okay, explain it to me. Talk me through what this is. And the guests are sometimes historians who've never really been on a podcast before. Sometimes they're a celebrity. But that's not the bit of it that really matters. What matters is, as it goes on, he sort of opens up the subject, but then as it develops, you start to realise just how smart he is as a guy, just how well informed he is, and it becomes this really lovely, often really cultural dialogues. So I think it's worth listening to, and also it can be very funny. So my 2 recommendations for that podcast are an episode called What's Up with Gender Identity, and there is a brilliant episode called What Is It Like Living in China? So yeah, getting curious. Okay, next. True Crime Sweden. Hosted by the brilliant Pernilla, who, when she says her name, is so gorgeous. She's like, Pernilla. It's just so lovely. I'm saying it and it's like Pernilla. True Crime Sweden, it's just a really well thought out, really well informed and thoroughly told good true crime podcast. Her voice is lovely. And, you know, she chooses some brilliant stories to tell. Immediately, I got into her, I think, around about maybe episode 20, and I thought, do you know what I'll do? I'll skip back a few. And on episode 15, it's called Yara. It's not an easy story. It's not a nice story at all. But her skill as a storyteller there is brilliant, because she kind of walks you through it in a way that you go, it's not as bad as it could be. So, true crime. What the hell's that? True crime. Have you heard of it? True Crime Sweden.
Hi, this is Pernilla from the True Crime Sweden podcast. If you thought Sweden was all about IKEA and Swedish meatballs, you are in for a big surprise. We do have our fair share of crimes in Sweden too, and I'm here to tell you all about them. I bring up all sorts of true crime cases, and by listening, you get to learn a little bit about how the legal system works in another country. For example, I did an episode about the case that created the Stockholm Syndrome. You've probably heard about the Stockholm Syndrome, but do you know the case behind it? Well, besides talking about true crime, I end each episode with a little fun fact about Sweden, something that is really appreciated by my listeners. And maybe I should add that my podcast is, of course, in English. If you think this sounds interesting, give it a try by searching for True Crime Sweden on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast at. I hope to see you.
Okay, next. The Vanished. Again, lots of you will be so familiar, but it's just such a good podcast. It basically just tells the story of people who have vanished. And what holds my attention with The Vanished is that with each episode, you never know if it's going to be a 15-year-old girl or an 80-year-old man. Or is it going to be a man in his 30s? Or is it going to be a woman in her... You just don't know. That is what's brilliant. And also, it can be cases that happened 10 years ago, and it can be cases that happened last month. It's just fascinating. And I also think what's brilliant about Marissa, who hosts that podcast and is the Vanished podcast, she gives the friends and the family and the relatives and anyone involved with that vanished person the room to speak. And they manage, through her craft, through Marissa's craft, they manage to pull together a really incredibly strong picture of the person who's missing and the event surrounding them going missing. It's just great. You could dive in anywhere here, but I personally love the episode that's called Kimberly Morrow from April last year. I found it really addictive, The Vanished, when I first got into it. Just really, really addicted to it. I kind of was like, just, yeah, getting so on a loop of listening to it all the time. Okay, next, another curveball. Not true crime in any way whatsoever. It's a podcast called Song Exploder. And why is Song Exploder so good? Well, what it does is, it takes songs and it breaks down the journey of a song from its initial conception through to its final life. And the artist who created that song sits and explains how they got from A to Z. So it might focus on the writing process, then how the drums were created, or how the particular sound of something was done. There was a recently brilliant episode on the song Go Your Own Way by Fleetwood Mac. And it's fascinating. Because you listen to it and you go, oh my god, I had no idea that song, to become the song that I know it is, went through that journey. They did an absolutely exceptional episode on, when was it? I think it was last year, picking apart an Arcade Fire song called Put Your Money on Me. That process was fascinating. So yeah, Song Exploder, just sometimes if you need to step away from murder, death, kidnap, mayhem, it's a nice wee alternative. Okay, I've got a couple to go. So next is Asian Madness, hosted by Jessica. It's a great podcast. The stories are really interesting, really well told, and I think you'll love Jessica's voice if you're not listening to that podcast. You'll love her voice. Sort of really struggled to pick my favourite, but in the end, I went for the episode, which, if you look for it, is titled The Singing Witch. Yes, The Singing Witch. It's so good. If you haven't heard Asian Madness, give it a go.
There's a good chance that you, are interested in true crime and all things creepy and weird. If I'm right, then there's also a good chance you might find my podcast, the Asian Madness Podcast, interesting. You can find me on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and pretty much everywhere else. It's true crime, it's dark, it's morbid, and it's weird. Come explore the dark side of Asia with me, because let's face it, Asia is just as crazy as the rest of the world.
Okay, and the final podcast recommendation. It's almost so obvious that I was like, maybe I shouldn't even include this in the list because it's so obvious. It's staring everybody in the face. But then I thought, no, I've got a relationship with this podcast, so then I want to talk about it. And it's Generation Y. I know it's been around for years. But the reason I think it's been around for years is because it's consistently good. And I'm pretty sure you guys will have listened, but if you haven't, the format is basically there's two guys, Justin and Aaron. They sit down weekly to discuss some incredible stories, some absolutely bonkers cases. They can talk about some of the biggest, serial killers, murderers, cases that we know in the world. Things that I've actually talked about. They've done the Menendez brothers, lots of stories that big podcasts cover. but they also sometimes just pick smaller, more domestic cases that have happened and they really pull them apart. And I think that's what I love about it. I love how detailed they are in pulling it apart. The pace of it, it's slow. They let each other, they have their own opinions, and it's just always solidly good stories. If you have not heard Generation Y and you go to your podcast app and you look for them, you're just going to see, I think it's like the 600 episodes or something. So I would dive in anywhere, really, you could. But the one episode that's always stayed with me is episode 206, and it's the Ed Gein story. So lots of people will know the Ed Gein story, and I actually did know it before coming to this podcast. But I thought, you know what? I really like the style of Generation Y. I'll give those guys a chance. I'll listen to it. And actually, their description of Ed Gein is the one that stuck with me the most. So whenever if that story ever gets referred to or mentioned, it's that Generation Y episode that I go to in my brain, because they just do such a good job there. But they do on everything. Okay, so that's it for my recommendations, and I'll just recap quickly. We've got Happy Face, Bloody Murder, Getting Curious, True Crime Sweden, The Vanished, Song Exploder, Asian Madness, and Generation Y. So there's a million more podcasts that I would like to recommend, but that's for another one of these short episodes. And really, that's it from me. I just thought I'd pop in and say hello and share those with you while I work on the next Extraordinary Stories podcast episode, which won't be this week, but will be really soon, believe me. It'll be along in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, or whatever the phrase about lambs is. Okay, so until I speak to you next, goodbye.